Hello everyone and welcome to NFLGirlUK Meets. I'm Liz Bhandari and this is a show that brings you closer to the game you love. Joining me this week is Chris Wesseling, writer and co-host of the much-loved Around the NFL podcast, where he provides non-stop analysis and opinions on all things American football. In our interview, Chris shares what it's like working with Gregg, Dan and Marc from the show, plus takes us back to what made him fall in love with writing and who influenced his style. We even talk about growing up in a sports-loving family and take a look at the history of the NFL. Enjoy the show! Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you?
I'm holding up pretty well. Lakeisha's pregnant and due in late May, so we're trying to get through this coronavirus lockdown and get all of that ready. She's in the nesting phase, so we're getting the house ready. It's a lot of baby stuff.
Oh, that's really exciting. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
Do you guys know what you're having, or is it being kept a surprise?
We're having a boy. We have not come up with a name. We had a girl's name. I'll figure it out, but it didn't work out that smoothly.
Oh. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I've been a huge fan of the Around the NFL show for a few years now, so yes, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for listening to us. It's been a long time.
Absolutely. Now, tell me, what was it that made you fall in love with writing? Who were the biggest influences on your style?
That is a good question. I fell in love with writing, I think, as a fallback option when I realized I wasn't going to be a professional baseball player. You know, very few people ever make it, and I didn't come close to making it, so I had to come up with something to do. And I think I was just always, you know, one of those people who could string sentences together and it made sense. So that's a good start. The people who have most influences on me, I went through a big Hunter S. Thompson phase in my late 20s. Charles Kuralt, who is a American journalist and travel writer, was a huge influence on me. I would say those are the biggest two right there.
And was writing about American football something that you'd always wanted to do? And was that like a key sport in your household growing up?
No, it was a distant third place behind baseball and basketball.
Wow.
Baseball was my first love and still is. I think I know the sport a lot better. I played it at higher levels. And basketball, too. Cincinnati does not have an NBA team. That's where I grew up. But I was like one of the few kids, you know, in my neighborhood who was enthralled with the NBA. Most Americans like me who grew up kind of middle class, white, Catholic, are huge college basketball fans, and I was for a long time. I kind of grew out of that the older I got and still maintained a love for the NBA. Football was third place. My mom did, you know, I have six brothers. We all played sports. My mom did not want us playing football. She was sort of like the liberal NPR mom who did not want her sons playing that physical of a game where they could get hurt. So it was not something I got into. I guess it was not something that I obsessed over until I started playing fantasy football in my early 20s, probably late teens, somewhere in the mid-1990s.
Wow, so fantasy football is kind of where it all really started then.
Yeah, football, I mean, that was... It really did get a huge spike in popularity from fantasy. It had overtaken baseball in this country as the most watched and the most popular by the 1970s, but it really jumped another level or so in the mid to late 90s with the internet and fantasy football. And the NFL knows that. The NFL knows that it has a lot of its success is due to fantasy.
I mean, yeah, I can totally see it because fantasy football is what helped me gain knowledge on players when I first got into the sport. Now, I understand you're from a large family. What was it like growing up with so many brothers?
Well, we were never bored. There were always sports, you know. In the summertime when school was out, Mom would literally lock the doors send us outside. If they don't come back till lunchtime, then we'd, the neighborhood kids would join us, and we'd be on the back patio with Kool-Aid and peanut butter crackers, eat lunch for a little bit, maybe jump in the swim pool, and then go back and play more baseball or kick the can or freeze tag or something. But there were always sports going on. We all played baseball every day during the summer, and we all played basketball when it was basketball season and football when it was football season. So there was always something to do. I still think to this day, I miss sitting down to watch an NBA finals with my mom and dad and my brothers and just all sitting around the TV and having rooting interest. It was a more innocent time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, it's well known that you love the history of the game. Are there any books that you would recommend as must-reads to fans?
Well, America's Game by Michael McCambridge is, to me, the definitive history of the NFL. Not just for the history's sake, but it goes several levels deep into sort of the sociology of what's going on in America and around the world, in addition to just football. So it puts it in proper context and tells a good story. So that, to me, is number one.
And I guess the pioneers of the game from the 1920s and 30s would probably be, no doubt amazed by what we call football today. What big developments do you kind of see happening in the coming years that I guess will change the game as we know it?
I wonder if tackling's going to be out of the game altogether. I'm not saying in the next 10 years, but maybe before we die, we might see a game where there's no tackling. So To me, you look at that kind of stuff, toughness is not something that's really valued anymore. And I continue to see a future where that is more and more the case, where other qualities take precedent over toughness. And I think always keeping as much money involved as possible will be the top priority. Just that's the way capitalism works. You'll see a game even more on speed and agility, I think. That has been true with every passing generation, that speed and agility just overtake the physicality of it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Now, when it comes to things like the Hall of Fame, is there anyone that you look back and think, has been a bit of an oversight that hasn't been nominated as of yet?
They've done a pretty good job. I look at Ken Anderson, a guy I grew up watching, a Bengals quarterback from the 70s and 80s. You can't really compare counting stats in the NFL. It just doesn't work that way like baseball does. Stats they change so much from generation to generation and from each passing revolution to the next. You just can't compare them. But against his contemporaries, he was the most accurate quarterback in the league. He was always one of the better, more efficient quarterbacks in the league. The Bengals had their most successful teams when he was there. To me, he stands out as a guy who should be in. But again, he's sort of borderline. It's not like an obvious call. It just seems like he's better than some of the guys in. I do think they've done a pretty good job with voting.
Yeah, I understand, they can't put everyone in either. So let's look at today. How did the opportunity of Around the NFL come around, and what is it like to work alongside Gregg, Dan, and Marc?
It's a weird story. We were all hired as writers. Marc and Dan had been with the NFL for a couple of years. They were doing Around the NFL blog posts, and then Gregg was hired to sort of turn that department into the Pro Football Talk of NFL.com, to do news and rumors of the day in a blog style. He kept Dan and Marc on for a trial basis, and I think there were some times where they didn't know if they were going to stay on. So there was some awkwardness there for a while, and then Gregg hired me away from RotoWorld in 2013. So I had to make a decision whether to leave my beautiful little tiny island on the east coast of America and move all the way over to Los Angeles, which was sort of totally different culture-wise than the island I had been on. So I moved out to Los Angeles kicking and screaming in June of 2013, and Gregg moved a week later from New York. He had been working remotely. So we moved in June, and then a month later, a month and a half later, we started the podcast sort of as a trial run. Only Mark, Dan, and Greg were on the first episode because I had to stay in the newsroom. I think I drew the short straw.
And watch and wait and see if there was any news because they had to have news coverage on the site. So that's how little podcasts were thought of at the time.
And slowly it's been us chipping away at that mindset. You know, we had a boss at one time, he's no longer there, who refused to say the word podcast in the office. He would call it show and say, I hate the word podcast. People don't even like podcasts. They're never going to be popular. He just hated everything about it. And, you know, thankfully he's gone. And when he left, there was room to grow. But I think that tension
has been key to the show. That
tension of not having the respect in the building,
a podcast not getting
any kind of love from the NFL for a long time, that has driven quite a bit of what we've done. And now it's sort of, you know, you wonder what you're railing against anymore. We'll still find a way to manufacture some tensions, but that's been a key part of it.
It's amazing to hear how it all started. Did you ever think it would be the success it is today, or that you'd be travelling as part of the NFLUK initiative doing shows for the fan base here?
Oh, God, no. I thought we were going to be
terrible. My voice coming from the American South was a little bit
more raw 7 or 8 years
years ago. Greg tells me he has a horrible voice. So I wasn't confident that any of that was going to work out. It took probably a good 6 to 8 months before I thought, okay, we got something here. And then I think 2 or 3 years in, I felt really confident when I realized after doing this show 3 times a week with Mark, Greg, and Dan that they're talented. Like this isn't just 4 goofballs talking about sports. Like Mark is a very talented person. There's nobody like him in the business. Nobody's brain works the way he does. Greg, I think, probably has the world of football under wraps as well as anybody as far as the issues, not just the ability to mix issues with the ability to watch game tape and devoted to it. And then Dan, the hosting ability and humor. I think Dan's love is more sort of radio and ours is writing. So Dan comes like from a Howard Stern type of background where those guys meant a lot to him, and he's driven the show, created the characters on the show basically through his love of that. So knowing that I was working with 3 really talented people, that's when I started to get confident probably a few years in, and it's been growing ever since. And I think people like the chemistry between us, and they appreciate that in a world that is increasingly not genuine, that we are sincere and we mix that with some humor. So I think that combination works well.
Yeah, I think it works really well. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the show. Now, you guys came over to the UK last year. How did that feel for you? And did you quite realise like how big the fan base actually is here?
Shocked. I mean, I had no idea. And I think that goes for all of us. There were indicators, a year or 2 into the show that we had a bigger overseas audience than we ever imagined. And we know that would not be the case if we were not associated with the NFL. If we were independent, if we worked for CBS or ESPN or somebody else, I don't think we would have had that reach. But I think all of us, to me, I've said several times, that's been the biggest surprise since I started this job, is how big we are over there and how much interest there is. And I know it's a smaller subset of the population which is into NFL football, but of that subset, the interest is rabid, and it sort of has to be. I know you guys have to wake up early in the morning or stay up in order to watch the game, so it takes a certain type to be interested in it.
Yeah.
I guess it's sort of like soccer's popularity here.
Yeah.
Where if you want to watch Premier League, you're staying up at odd hours, and you're only a small subset of the population, but you get together with your friends who share that interest, and
it's passionate.
I think that's what impresses me the most, is how passionate and how knowledgeable British fans are.
Yeah, definitely. It's a sport that, it grows year on year, and it's an amazing community to be a part of. Really, it's a really great bunch of people. Yeah, definitely. It's a sport that grows year on year in the UK, and, you know, the community of fans, they're honestly just great, and I feel so proud to be part of that.
Most of the feedback we get now on Twitter and Instagram is from overseas listeners. Americans just don't seem to be as interactive about it.
Which is just crazy to think because it's so huge there. Anyway, listen, Chris, it's been amazing to have you on today. I wish you and your wife the best of luck with the new edition, and I look forward to hearing more from you and the Around the NFL boys soon. Take care.
Thank you, Liz. It's been a pleasure.
I've watched Around the NFL for years and followed Chris on social media as a result of it, so it was great to hear more from him, and especially on where he found his inspiration to write. I'd also like to apologise for the sound issues in the episode. That is not our usual style, so again, sorry about that. Join me next time when I speak to Coach Laurie Locust, Assistant Defensive Line Coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Until then, thanks for listening.